Hey everyone, it's Pittico from Daydream Nation, and look who's back to the channel. Welcome back, Melissa Nee. How's it going?
Thanks for having me. It's going great.
We are going to talk about a special year. It's sort of like a pseudo sequel to a show that we did last year that was a lot of fun, where I put the premise 1984 is the greatest year in hard rock and heavy metal. You counterpointed that and said, let's look at 1980. And boy, oh boy, looked at the list and here we are. We are going to talk about 1980 being the greatest year in hard rock and heavy metal. So similar to the show last year, we're just going to go through various acts, the albums that they put out, maybe some anecdotes or experiences, whether you saw them at the time or whatnot, and we take it from there. So do you have fond memories of 1980? Anything in particular? Boy, for me, it
I,
was just such a long time ago.
I do. So because I'm old enough to remember 1980. And 1980 was probably the year that I really solidified myself as a metal kid and really as kind of a music geek where I was reading the liner notes, caring about who was in the band, thinking about production and sequencing and all the geeky metal stuff that we do. And it was an interesting year for me, and it was a tough year for me in that I moved from one state to another. So that was a little bit of a tough year in retrospect, in that way. But it was also the first year that I started going to real concerts, and so I saw a lot of really, really pivotal shows that year.
Well, I think 1980 for me is when I began to care about music, and whether
Yeah.
it was hard rock, heavy metal, pop, new wave, I think it was just such an interesting year in music. Fantastic signature albums came out in all genres of music. How about we get started? We'll talk about the various Diamond Star releases of 1980. I think we probably got to talk about one of the biggest smashes that year, and this was basically the album that solidified this band into legendary status, and I'm talking about AC/DC, Back in Black. The previous year, 1979, you had Highway to Hell, then the tragic passing of Bon Scott, and that would be to lose their singer, that would be enough to knock most bands for six, but not AC/DC. They replaced the singer, put out an album that even did better than the last album, To the Power of 10 and Beyond. Undertook this massive worldwide tour, which was a smash. And it's an album that produced by Mutt Lange that's a smash to this very, very day. Gets played. You know, are you a fan of Back in Black? And
I love this album.
do you remember this
And
album in the day?
I I do. And not only that, but I saw this tour. And it was the first time that I ever saw AC/DC, because I unfortunately didn't get to see Vaughn. And I was an AC/DC fan. And so I was I was a little I always say I was sad that he passed away and I was disappointed. So when they came back with this album, Back in Black, no pun intended, um, I was like, wow, this is great. And listen, every single song on that album was a hit. And you're right, like to this day, this is the album that everybody knows, and it really did solidify them as a worldwide band. They did so well over here in the US with that album, and to this day they play tons of songs off that album. I just saw them last year, and a good portion of the set was the Back in Black album.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing I'm going to say on this show that hasn't been said on any other show on YouTube, so I won't. I'll just zip my mouth. You know what I mean? What can I say that's going to add anything other than it
Yeah,
is
I
a
mean,
bona fide classic.
100%.
Um, and it's kind of, I don't think it's heavy metal. It's hard
No.
rock, because it wasn't just fans and genre fans like us that bought albums. It was the neighbors and the neighbors' neighbors and their cousins, and it was something that seemed to appeal to everybody. Hard rock was definitely front and center in the mainstream, and for a brief moment in time, we thought that, hey, our music is cool and is being celebrated.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was only, going to happen a few times in the next 20 or 30 years. There was only going to be a Back in Black, once in a blue moon sort of thing. I definitely think this is a very worthy one that we start our show, 1980 Back in Black.
Yeah, and I mean it was probably it's also what got them airplay. They played some AC/DC songs in the 70s, but this is really what got them airplay and what keeps them airplay. Because nowadays, if you listen to classic rock radio here in the Boston area, for example, they're playing stuff off this album. This is what they're playing. Maybe you get a Dirty Deeds or, once in a while, but
Mm.
this is what they're playing. This is what they're hanging their hat on all these years later.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's
Well, if it wasn't for
huge.
this album, the Bon era wouldn't have been. People wouldn't have gone back to the Bon era,
Correct.
and
Correct. 100%.
and that's a whole different cult in itself, where the legend of Bon has grown threefold and deservedly so. But you needed this album, the success, the planting the
Yeah,
seed to this, for people
absolutely.
to go back and say, "Oh, I
Absolutely.
need to go back and discover what happened before."
Also, AC/DC, even though they're not metal, they're what I call metal adjacent. So they're a band that is a hard rock band, but metalheads love.
Yeah,
So they
very
kind of
true.
have their feet in both
Yeah.
on both sides.
And you talk to people like Angus Young. He sort of gets very irritated. He doesn't want anything to do with the heavy metal tag. He just says, "We just rock
A
and
few out
roll."
there that,
He
yeah,
prefers to be associated like with Chuck Berry and the classic. But
right. Yeah.
anyway, I think that's the perfect way to start off the 1980 classic albums. Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. So, oh wow! I mean, it's the first album with Ronnie James Dio. Previous album, I love Never Say Die, but it really was probably commercially a nadir for Black Sabbath, and this was a great comeback album in every shape or form. And Ronnie leaving Rainbow. You look at his career, that maybe you might be lucky to have one truly great album in your sort of discography, and he had three: Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and in the future Dio. But and Heaven and Hell, it's just such a great album. What do you think of this album?
So it's my favorite Black Sabbath album. It is so I still am. I was a big Rainbow fan, and I really loved Ronnie James Dio, and I was disappointed when I found out that he had left the band. I really was. And also, Never Say Die is not one of my favorite Sabbath albums. They definitely were kind of at the end of the road. So this is a rebirth. This album is a rebirth of him and Black Sabbath as well. And what a great combination the two of them turned out to be. Children of the Sea is my favorite Sab song. I saw this tour. It was the first time I saw Sabbath. It was the first time I saw Ronnie James Dio. Um, yeah, I mean, absolutely love this album. And it, in many ways, is like Back in Black in that it kind of revitalized the band and saved the band in many ways. There kind of wouldn't be a future if this album didn't do as well as it did and was received as well as it is. And of course, we have to talk about the classic cover. That album cover is just absolutely classic. I have it hanging on my wall. I mean, that's how classic it is.
Yeah, I think it was a different sort of Sabbath too, because Sabbath previous to that was very riffy based, like stoner rock, doomy. But this one was more, and I think Ronnie brought a different sense of
Yeah,
melody. It's certainly, I think Tony Iommi was up for the challenge, and he kind of expanded his musical palette of what a song could be. And, a lot of people sort of talk about Ronnie, that his lyrics very sort of like demons and wizards, and
ethereal, yeah.
but he definitely brought a different sort of light and shade to Sabbath that maybe previously was waning in the Aussie years. I certainly think that Tony wouldn't have done a Children of the Sea or a Heaven and Hell with Ozzy.
No,
because
no.
of
I mean,
the
they're two different
vocal,
bands in many ways.
but maybe because of the vocal limitations. And I'm not knocking the Aussie era,
No,
but
me
I'm just
neither. I mean,
saying,
but I think they're like two different bands in so many ways.
mm,
They really are like two different bands
it
because
just
the
it just
subject matter is
revitalized.
different, the whole composing is different, like the whole thing is different.
Yeah, well, I think it just revitalized them. So,
100%.
and I think that's a segue to another great album, Ozzy Osbourne, Blizzard of Oz. So you've got the legend of Randy Rhoads, the wonderful Bob Daisley, bass player, lyricist, the fantastic Lee Kerslake, underrated drummer, but
100%.
great drummer. And what a great debut album. And, basically this lineup only did 2 albums. And unfortunately, with the sad passing of Randy Rhoads, but the legend status continues on. His guitar playing is celebrated. And it's such an iconic album, great iconic album cover. And it's easily one of Ozzy's greatest works, whether it's Sabbath or solo otherwise. What do you think of this album?
I love this album, and I was really pleased to see. Again, we talking again about the theme so far has been about revitalization, about reinventing yourself
Yeah.
and coming back from the ashes. And again, this is another album that absolutely did that for Ozzy. Yes, I did see this tour. So I did see Randy. And, you know, I was really excited to see Ozzy because I was a Sabbath fan. And much like I was excited to see Tony live, you know what I mean? So for me, it was like seeing a legend live. It was, oh my God, and I remember this show because we pushed our way up and we were pretty close. We're packed in like sardines, but we were pretty close to the stage. And Ozzy being Ozzy, he's all sweaty and he walks back
Mm.
and forth and he's clapping and it's Ozzy. It's Ozzy being Ozzy, you know what I mean? And he looked like he was happy to be back and revitalized as well. And I mean, this album really was a shot in the arm for him. And another, again, to say that if this album hadn't worked out, Ozzy would probably be all done or pretty close to done because he needed this. He needed this shot. He needed this album to do really, really well in order to bring him up to the status that he is now. And we all know, and God rest his soul, we all know that he's an icon and he is huge and he's somebody that had made a name for himself after Sabbath. So, I mean, this album was pivotal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just think that it's sort of, he was just very lucky that he linked up with such a hotshot guitarist. And who would have ever
Yes.
thought?
Yes.
Because Randy Rhoads' work previous to that, I mean, he was very well known on the LA circuit in the
Yeah.
Sunset Strip as being a very hotshot guitarist, but his recorded work with Quiet Riot with those 2 Japan-only albums was quite ordinary. You wouldn't sort of listen to
Yeah,
that
no,
and think,
nothing really special. Nothing
yeah,
really
you wouldn't think that the legend was
Destiny.
born, but
Yeah.
there was some
No.
sort of energy and sort of lightning in the bottle with those 4 on those first 2 albums that
Yeah, great
brought him
lineup.
out. And just listening to him live, he just just had the spark, with
Very
those
much.
neoclassical runs and the arpeggios and the riffage. And Ozzy seemed really inspired, and it just sort of spurred everybody. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was just
Good
definitely
combination.
lightning in the bottle. And I agree, because if it wasn't for, um, you know, this album or this band, yeah, definitely Ozzy was on Skid Row. And yeah, there you go. Three out of 3 albums we've covered so far that are just
That's
solid gold,
absolutely.
part of the pantheon of hard rock and heavy metal. I'll throw another one to you, which is probably one of the greatest albums of this band's very legendary sort of career. And I'm talking about Rush, Permanent Waves. This was one of their big commercial successful albums. And, it was kind of a breakthrough album where for a period of time they broke through into the mainstream. It was charting quite well in America. It was played on radio. They were probably the biggest known cult band in the in America during this period. What do you think of this album?
I love this album, and yeah, I saw this tour. It was the first time I saw Rush. And you're right about this album, about it's radio friendly. I mean, a lot of people, 2112 is my favorite Rush album. I love the 70s Rush, but for a lot of people, it was not that accessible. It was just too much, too weird, especially if you were 15 years old. A lot of people that I went to school with were like, I don't understand this band. It was too much. It was too over everybody's head. And so this album was so accessible. And you're right, it got tons of airplay. That's when they got airplay. That's when people started to look at them a little bit differently. They had some commercial success. It's another album, I hate to repeat myself, that kind of put them in a really good pole position, because if they had done another Hemispheres or 2112, they would have continued to be a really amazing but sort of underground prog band just out there doing their thing, and people like us would love them, but your mainstream people wouldn't be that familiar with them. And then you fast forward to now, where Neil's passed away, and now they're doing this tour coming up. And I don't think that if this album had done so well, I don't think that in 2026 you would see them have these brisk sales that they've had for these tickets, and been able to charge what they've been charging. I think that it would have been a very different story. So again, another album that really set the band up for success in the future.
Yeah, I think this album is where they really paid attention to song arrangements and hooks, because I think that why this really converted into the mainstream is a lot of these songs have got really tasty pop hooks.
Yes, yes.
And it sort of paved the way that you would start to hear these songs played on radio, and that's not such a bad thing.
And they were
So
shorter too. It
yeah,
wasn't
much shorter.
like
So
one of an entire album.
so less obscure, less doing a whole side about snow dogs and Medusa or whatnot. Like obscure
Right,
prog topics,
right,
going a
right.
little bit more mainstream. But at the end of the day, the melodies were really hooky, and it sort
Catchy.
of converted a lot of fans. And this album sells to this very
To
day,
this
and
day, and
Legend was
these are the
born.
songs that you hear on classic rock radio. I mean, you're not really hearing, you're not really hearing anything off of Hemispheres or 2112, or Farewell to Kings. You're hearing stuff off of this album. You're hearing Free Will and Tom Sawyer and that kind of stuff. That's what you're hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. Another album I'd like to talk about is Def Leppard, On Through the Night. This is a band that was very young. I think they might have been only 18 or 19 years. And boy, oh boy, were they accomplished. And, basically you could sort of start to see that this band, they had harmonies like Queen, but at the same time, they had riffage like AC/DC. There was something quite special about them. They looked good, they played well, they were young, they were hungry, and, they were starting to make a mark. And, a lot of folks love this early Def Leppard album, and they go back to this album and go, gee, I wish they started, if they could play stuff like On Through the Night. Were you a fan of Def Leppard in the day?
I
This
was.
early Def Leppard?
Def Leppard is a band that you talk about doesn't want to be considered heavy metal. They also don't want to be considered new wave of British heavy metal, which these first two albums are. Um, I did not see this tour because they didn't come to the US. They were super young. I think that Rick wasn't even 18. I think he was still like 17 or something, 16 or 17. He was super, super young. Yeah, I mean, they've often talked about how Joe has said how, they want to be in the same conversation with Queen and bands like that. But they were still a hard rock band back then. Um, and the first two albums are different. Like you got this album, which is probably my favorite Def Leppard album. And for me, it kind of like the first two albums, and then I like Pyromania, and then it kind of drops off for me. They go in a very different direction. And so this is the album that is the new wave of British heavy metal album. And then the next album, you can kind of see where they've been and where they're going. And then a little bit further in Pyromania, where they've been and where they're going. And then they kind of veer off into something completely different from their first albums. And it's sad that they seem to like disrespect the first two albums, that they don't consider them important, or they don't seem to really like them. And they're my favorites of the discography.
Yeah, I think the guitar combination of Pete Willis and Steve Clark were great. They were
Yeah.
hungry. They had a good ear for melody and riffage. And yeah, like some of these songs are really aggressive, right in their face. And look, really think for such a young band, they seem to me very fully formed and accomplished. And
Yeah.
even listen to their EP, which was released as a record store day release. I play it a lot. I love it. And you just listen to that and you go, gee whiz, this band was straight off the block. They had something special. But, you know, like they were really wanted to conquer America. I mean, the second
Yes.
track on this album's Hello America. So you can tell that their
Yes,
intent is really
yeah.
we want
They had a
to
plan. They
get there.
absolutely, I mean, they had a plan in place. I mean, they knew what
Mm,
they wanted, and you can't fault them for that. They had a business model. They had a plan. They weren't just a bunch of guys on Saturday night trying to meet girls and get some money for beer. I mean, they had a business plan.
yeah, absolutely. Another band that was their first album came out in the peak of the new wave of British heavy metal was Iron Maiden. Their very first self-titled album in 1980 called Iron Maiden with the late great singer Paul Di'Anno. A very different sort of sounding album, probably because the vocal delivery of Paul Di'Anno is very different to
Different.
Bruce Dickinson. It's a lot more punky. It's a little bit more syncopated. The songs are very more, slightly more spiky, less proggy. I won't say meandering, but very kind of concise. It was a different sort of Iron Maiden, the first two albums. And it's certainly got a bit of a fan base, and there's a dedicated fan base that, love those first two albums more than anything that the Bruce Dickinson era did. I like it a lot, but my heart probably lies to the classic lineup of Number of the Beast onwards. Are you a fan of this first album?
Massive fan. Well, everybody knows how I feel about Iron Maiden, and this is where
Mm.
my love affair began. And we were talking about album covers, right? So I often told the story about how I was familiar with the single "Running Free," and I went in to get the single at the record store, and they didn't have it. And the guy goes, "But they got an album," and I didn't even know the album was out. And, he shows me this album, and the album cover, the Electric Matthew, who becomes Eddie, is iconic. And you're just going, oh yeah, this is definitely for me. It is punky, which I know Steve doesn't like it, but it is. Sorry, man. Um, it is much more in your face. The subject matter is not as cerebral as they would become. Um, because everybody's young. I mean, even, Steve's young, everybody's young. And so it's a different vibe. But man, you could just see where they were going. And I'm a massive Cliffy fan. I do love excuse me, Clive. And I and I was disappointed when he left the band, although I do love Nico. But I mean, this lineup, Dennis Stratton, I mean, it's a great lineup. It's a great lineup. And I mean, they obviously did very well with a different lineup going forward, the people that they've swapped out and so on and so forth. But man, this is a great lineup, just an iconic lineup. And this is just an absolutely classic album.
Yeah,
And it's an album that I don't actually know. Like, I know Iron Maiden fans that you're right, that are purists, that the first two albums and that's kind of it. I don't know anybody that is the opposite. That like, I don't really like those first two albums, because everybody just appreciates it for what it is, even if they feel that Bruce is a better singer. But he's not necessarily a better singer. He's a different singer. I mean, he has a better range, but he's a different singer. He's not. They're apples and oranges. They're very different, and that's why, like
Mm.
when you hear Bruce do the early stuff, for me, it's not as good. It doesn't resonate as well. I just feel like one of the things about Paul is that he has that attitude, and it comes through when he sings.
It's punk delivery. And I
Yes,
don't think
yes.
anyone that can sing with the attack that he does, as I said, it's the vocal inflections. It's very spiky. It's a very aggressive. I think it's really the vocals that give that punk flavor. I think, it's just maybe accidental that all the instrumentation of Steve Harris and everything else makes it even more sound punkier, even though, as you said, like Steve Harris just hates punk and sort of denies it. But the whole package, it does come across as very aggressive, and it just fits in with what was happening in the day with new wave of British heavy metal and other bands that sounded like that, like Diamond Head and Praying Mantis, etc., etc. Yeah, look, it can't be denied. These albums are classic. They weren't to be repeated.